All right, everyone. It's good to see you all. Thanks for being here today. I'm really excited about this series and this session. One of the things I'm super excited about is, of course, going back and relearning a bunch of the details that I'd learned in seminary or hadn't learned. And it's always fun as a teacher to relay like new information that you found, not just stuff you already know. So we're starting a 7-part series called Episcopal Identity. I've got my notes here, so I don't know this all by heart, but I know, of course, a lot of it. And so what we'll do is we'll talk about it, and then we'll have some time for your interactions with the material. And we'll just see where this leads us. What I love about this is that the topic that we're doing is it's pertinent and relevant to every one of us who is here. You're in an Episcopal church. Some of you have been Episcopalians your whole life. Others of you are new to the Episcopal Church, and everybody in between. And so what we're learning today, it's kind of like learning about yourself, right? If this is the path that you've chosen, then you are kind of learning about your own family history. So that's something that's really fun. So origins. I want to actually open with a word of prayer. Would that be okay? Let's pray. The Lord be with you. God, we thank you for the rich history of the Episcopal Church. We're not a perfect denomination by any means. We're just trying to love perfectly. And so we ask that everything that we learn today would not just inform us intellectually, but your Spirit would help us see between the lines where you are moving and ways in which we might be repeating history. And we ask always, God, that you would use what we learn so that it can change our world today. In your holy name, we pray. Amen. All right. So when we talk about identity, I thought about like how, when you're getting to know someone new, what's one of the first questions you ask them? Somebody that you get to know. Where are you from? Right. Thank you. I've had conversations this week with multiple people, and that's the question. Where are you from? So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of the Episcopal Church, but in order to talk about our history as Episcopalians, we have to go back to something much further. We have to talk about the Reformation, and that's where we're going to start today. So what is the Reformation? Who knows who this guy is? Martin Luther. Does anyone know what he's posting? The 95 Theses. So this is the door of a church in Wittenberg. And this was the place where people just posted like things that were important to the community, like looking for my lost dog type of thing, you know. And so this is kind of the community bulletin board. And Martin Luther was a German monk, and he was a university professor at Wittenberg University. Am I saying that right, Janet? Yeah, thank you. And in 1517, he posted these 95 Theses against the abuse of indulgences on the door of the castle church in Wittenberg. So what are indulgences? So indulgences were something that the Catholic Church was using in many ways to raise money. It was also theological. If you remember what purgatory is, and we're not going to go too deep into this, it was this kind of middle space between life and then eternal life, where you could, as a part of your penance, you could pay a portion of money to the Catholic Church in order to expedite your time in purgatory. And if you paid enough money, you could just bypass it. And so Martin Luther, this very thoughtful theologian, said there's something wrong with this. And so he posted these things. And I want you, this is what the 95 Theses looks like. And right here that I'm circling is this introduction. And I thought it would be interesting to see what it says. Out of love for the truth and from desire to elucidate it, the Reverend Father Martin Luther, Master of Arts in Sacred Theology and ordinary lecturer therein at Wittenberg, intends to defend the following statements. and to dispute on them in that place. Therefore, he asks that those who cannot be present and dispute with him orally shall do so in their absence by letter, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. So he argued that the church had to be reformed, and salvation by faith alone was his big thing. So you don't have to do works. Salvation by faith alone, and it has to do with the grace of God. And he had a big critique of the Catholic Church's focus on works, sale of indulgences. Another thing that he mentions in here is that the Catholic Church would have to have you do pilgrimages also in order to repent of your sins. So he said, you don't need to do that. You just have to confess your sins to God. You don't need a mediator to do that for you. Salvation alone, by faith alone, and the grace of God. So Martin Luther wanted the Bible printed in the everyday language of people, not just in Latin. He really believed in lessening the distance between your everyday person and their God. The Pope ended up condemning this and excommunicating Martin Luther. And it was actually the Catholics who referred to the Reformation as Protestants, right? They're protesting against the Catholic Church. So Luther was excommunicated in 1521. But I want to show you some of the other important reformers during the time. So this is John Calvin, and this is Zwingli. And John Calvin is where the Reformed tradition comes from. Zwingli also was Reformed. They ended up combining their theologies into what we know today as the Reformed Church. But what's interesting about all of this is that even though they all believed in salvation by faith alone, one of the main issues that they were debating actually had to do with communion. And this might be important a little bit later, and I'll mention that. But I thought this was so interesting for us to know is that Luther, he believed that, and all of them were against transubstantiation. Transubstantiation is the Catholic belief that when the priest consecrates the elements, it actually becomes the blood and the body of Jesus. And they said no to that. So they were all in agreement that transubstantiation is not the theology of communion. Luther believed that Christ's body and blood are present within and under the bread and wine instead of replacing them. This view came to be known as consubstantiation. Zwingli moved further away from transubstantiation than Martin Luther, and he regarded the Eucharist as a sign or a symbol, emblematically and figuratively representing or signifying scriptural truths and spiritual blessings. This is a quote. And that the reception of them is a mere commemoration of what Christ has done. So it's symbolic. Calvin was Augustinian in regarding the Eucharist. This is for those of you who geek out on this kind of stuff. Okay, so don't worry about it if you're not following. He was Augustinian. He regarded the Eucharist as a sacrament with dominical authority, as a visible sign of an invisible grace. Does that sound familiar? He insisted that the Eucharist gave what is represented, since we are not asked by the Lord merely to look, but to eat and drink. In this, he rejected the view that the Christ gave the bread and wine as a mere symbol. So he's not in the Zwingli camp. So anyway, this was called the Supper Strife, Lord's Supper, Supper Strife. So that is these reformers. There was another reformer who ended up in Geneva at one point from Scotland, and he was influenced greatly by John Calvin, and he was the father of Presbyterianism. Does anyone know his name? John Knox. So, all right. Okay. So let's talk about the Reformation in England. So the reason this is important is we have to understand that the start of the Episcopal Church goes back to the Reformation in England specifically. And one thing that was kind of unique about the Reformation, the shape of the Reformation in England, is that it was political and religious. And the political part is what gets the headline news most of the time because of its soap opera quality. Well, we don't often recognize that it was very much a religious movement as well. So what I want to talk about today is just start with the political roots and see where it takes us. But 8 years before Martin Luther posted the 95 Theses on the Wittenberg Castle Church, there was a young king that was coronated. Who's this handsome fella? He was 17 years old when he became king, King Henry VIII. And his brother Arthur was actually in line to be king. This guy was trained for the church, believe it or not. There is no way this guy was on the way to being a king. So he was trained theologically. He was trained for a career in the church as a child. And let's see what my next point here is. Okay, so Luther's 95 Theses, just so you see the timeline, 1527. Okay, ignore this one. We'll get to it. I knew that was going to happen. You make one wrong move and you got to go back around. All right. Okay, so Henry's brother Arthur had had a political marriage with Catherine of Aragon, and Catherine was the daughter of the king and queen in Spain, and he married about 5 months after his wedding. He died. Arthur, this is the older brother, and they tried to marry off Catherine to Henry, and Henry was like, "I'm not interested." But they started grooming Henry for to be a king. When his dad died, Henry became king, and he just got this thing for Catherine, who he wasn't interested in marrying before. So he marries Catherine, and the marriage was, people called it exceptionally good. So that was the marriage that we know he was married to multiple wives. That's the one that historians think was actually the one that meant the most to him, and that he somehow kind of grieved for the rest of his life after he divorced her. But he wanted children, and he wanted specifically a boy. And Catherine could not bear him a son. She had multiple miscarriages. She ended up giving him a daughter who you guys know her name? Mary. You guys are awesome. All right, so she gave him a daughter, but she didn't give him a son. So Henry tries to divorce Catherine, and he goes to the Pope. Oh, by the way, he had this thing for one of this other woman who was in Catherine's royal court. Her name was Anne Boleyn. He had this thing for her, and Anne would not agree to be one of his mistresses. She said, "If you want to be with me, it's got to be official." So Henry went to the Pope, and he said, "I want a divorce." Now, here's a little bit of background here, is that the Pope said no, but this was infuriating to Henry. Why? Because Henry, as I mentioned, had been trained theologically. He cared a lot about theology, believe it or not, even though he was like a real narcissist. And he, not like those are two mutually exclusive things, right? So he had, prior to all of this, he had written this thing defending the Catholic Church against the Reformation. So it was anti-Reformation. And the previous Pope had given him the title Defender of the Faith. And so, so he had this, this reputation in Rome. He was this like good king, loyal to the Pope and all this kind of stuff. But the next Pope denies him the divorce. The backstory here is that Catherine's nephew was a really powerful emperor. He was the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. And he was obviously tight with the Pope. And the Pope, we think, was, as though I'm one of the historians, like the Pope was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like, I'm not going to disappoint the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. And England was still this small place up here. So he denies him the divorce. And it's at this point that let's see, what do I have next? 1529, that Henry creates this parliament called the Reformation Parliament. And over a series of years, the Reformation Parliament starts to remove the power of the Catholic Church from England. And in 1534, Henry declares himself as the supreme head of the Anglican Church. And this move was in many ways what sparked the real beginning of the religious change that happened in England. So all this politics, because you had a king who was completely anti-Reformation before, people who were for the Reformation couldn't speak up, right? Or they were being persecuted for doing so. After this happened, Henry was very interested in the thoughts of the Reformation because he's moving away from the Catholic Church at this point. It's like the scales fell from his eyes. So when Henry dies, his son becomes king at the age of 9. And Henry has to set up for his son this special council that is, do I have that in here? No, not yet. So this special council that's going to follow and like do all the laws and stuff until his son comes of age. And this, by the way, is 17 years after Henry divorced from the Catholic Church. Okay. And Henry, by the way, married Anne Boleyn. And this is the son of the third wife. You guys know what happened to Anne Boleyn, right? Okay. Off with her head. So he appoints Thomas Cranmer, who is a big name in Episcopal theology. He appoints Thomas Cranmer as the Archbishop of Canterbury. That was the first Archbishop of Canterbury in the Anglican Church, even though there had been Archbishops of Canterbury in the Catholic time. But, you know, as the Anglican Church started, Thomas Cranmer was the first. And Thomas Cranmer and Henry had started work on what would become called the Book of Common Prayer. And in 1549, the first Book of Common Prayer was established. Now, why is this important? It's important because the Reformation was in Europe was really stuck on theology, right? Here are the lines. If you believe this, this, and this, you're a part of us. In England, the Reformation looked like a gathering and rallying around prayer. So not a specific creed that tells you who's in and who's out, but around prayer. So here we pray together. Those who pray together stay together, in other words, right? So Book of Common Prayer in 1549. In 1551, there was a revision to the Book of Common Prayer. And then in 1553, King Edward dies just around the age of 16. And guess, oh, this is, by the way, this is Thomas Cranmer. Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, he's the primary theological force behind the Book of Common Prayer. So after Edward dies, Mary takes over. Mary, remember, is the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, whom he had divorced. And she is a fanatic Catholic. So she becomes queen in 1553, and she's very Catholic. She executes most of the Protestant bishops, including Thomas Cranmer. It's a great way to deal with problems, right? Just eliminate it. She restores papal authority, and in 1558, she dies after 5 years. So after her, this is just the quick stuff. So she's so extreme that those who were for the Catholic Church in England actually became sympathetic to the Protestant cause, right? You think about someone who is so extreme that it actually turns you off. So when her sister becomes Queen Elizabeth the First, she inherits basically a society that doesn't even know, like they've seen the extremes and they're not sure where to go next. Obviously, she wants to unite the kingdom. So she reinstates the Act of Supremacy, which is no more Pope. So the Pope is excited for 5 years under Mary, and now the Pope is gone. And she comes up with what is known as the Elizabethan settlement. And the Elizabethan settlement essentially is that we are going to look and act Catholic. So those of you who like coming to the church and to feel like it's Catholic, you're going to get that. But our theology is going to be Protestant. So most of the people who are coming to church couldn't tell a difference. So they were happy, and the theologians could tell a difference. And of course, you had extremists who said you didn't go far enough toward Protestantism, and you had extremists who said, you're not Catholic enough. But that's how this whole thing went. So then in 1603, after about 45 years, Queen Elizabeth dies. So she had a long time to make this, get this to be established. So the Elizabethan settlement is what gave the Anglican Church its unique Catholic and Protestant flavor. So and we're going to talk more about this when we get to the theology part in the new year. But if you've ever walked into the church and you heard things like we're Catholic light or we're Catholic no guilt, right? Those are not the best definitions of who we are. But if you felt it and if you come from the Catholic tradition and you're like, wow, this is really familiar, it's because of what is called the Via Media, the middle way, the Elizabethan settlement. Any questions about this so far? We got a microphone right here because people online need to be able to hear you. Would you mind coming up to the microphone? I know that's a long for most of you, but come on up.
So is there something that Elizabeth I did different from King Henry VIII when he decided that he's going to create the Anglican Church just because he wants to get a divorce?
Yes. King Henry really was Catholic at heart. For him, the English church and the Protestantism was just a way to get what he wanted, but he was actually never for the Reformation, even till the end. So he was really hesitant. That's why it wasn't until Edward was king that Cranmer was able to move forward with the Book of Common Prayer, which happened just 2 years after Edward was coronated. All right. So what does all of this history have to do with the Episcopal Church? So what is the Episcopal Church? The Episcopal Church is the U.S. branch of the Church of England. A lot of people who I talk to who don't know what the Episcopal Church is say, oh, you're a priest. The first thought is you're a Catholic priest, but you're wearing a wedding ring. It's strange. Or I've got like my kids with me and they're not sure what to do with it. So I say really fast, I'm an Episcopal priest. I'm not a Catholic priest, right? We look and act Catholic, but we're not. And so then the next question is, so what is the Episcopal Church? And I say the Episcopal Church is like it's the U.S. branch of the Church of England. So what that means is that we have to talk about the story of the Episcopal Church in America. So the Protestant Episcopal Church and its beginnings. And I'm not going to come too far in our history. We're going to just get to how we became known as the Protestant Episcopal Church. And then we're going to have other sessions where we talk about defining moments in the Episcopal Church. And some of them will bring us up to the current. So you're going to have to follow this series in order to get all this. So 1607, you had the first English settlers establish Jamestown colony in Virginia. And this is just about 5 years after Elizabeth died. So these settlers brought with them an Anglican priest. They're all Anglican. They're all known as Anglican. There's no such thing as Episcopal. So they brought with them an Anglican priest, and they had their first Eucharist together in Jamestown. Let's see, do I have the year here? No. So they hold the first English service. Now, has anyone been to Jamestown? Okay, I have not. Do you guys recognize that structure? So this is the remains, the tower of the first church that was built. Actually, not the first one, but the first like major one like this that was brick, and it was toward the end of the 1600s. And what archaeologists have done is when they found this tower and they dug around it, they found all kinds of ways of being able to, what's it called? What's the word? Like when you like come up with the like the way it used to be historically. What is that called? Restoration. Thank you. They were able to restore on the inside what the original church looked like. And so the settlers settle. It's the first permanent settlement in the U.S. Everyone is English, everyone is Anglican. What's interesting is that no English bishop set foot on American soil from 1607 until after the Revolution, all right, after the Revolutionary War. So no English bishop. What does that mean? Who can tell me what that means? What? You could be creative. Yep, we're going to talk a little bit about that. What else does that mean? You couldn't consecrate any bishops. What else couldn't you do? Ordain priests. No confirmations happened in America at all, right? No one was confirmed during this time period, like almost 200 years. So if you were a priest and you wanted to be ordained, you had to get on a boat, you had to go to England, you had to be ordained, and then you would come back. And what did you have to do in order to be ordained?
Swear fealty.
Yes, you had to swear fealty. You were loyal to the crown. And so you would come back and then you would, lead your people. So it's a real way to kind of hold on to power, to control. Interestingly, the settlement and all the colonies that were English run, they were under the Bishop of London. So the Bishop of London had jurisdiction, and the Bishop of London could make up all the rules and all this. But what's interesting is that during this time period, the vestry system actually became really powerful because whereas in England, you had the bishop coming up with all the rules, here in the absence of a bishop, the laity started to, they had to be creative. They also had to come up with all kinds of, not laws, but systems to deal with situations that they weren't dealing with in England. And so we know that the vestry system became strong. We know that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, for example, were served on their vestries. And the other thing is we know that clergy in America who had their fealty to the crown, they were paid by taxes. So they collected taxes, and that's how they made their living. In a lot of churches in Europe, still that's the case. Like my brother lives in Sweden, and he's a church organist in Sweden, and everybody there gets paid through taxes if you work for the church. So in I said this, Bishop of London oversees the church, no English bishop visited. So in 1776, you have the Declaration of Independence. And I wanted to read this to you because most Anglican clergy who have sworn loyalty to the king in their ordination, they stayed loyal to the king. Now, this was really tense because you had all these patriots and all these people who wanted to break away from England, and you had the people who had the platform in the pulpits trying to convince the congregations to stay loyal. Okay, go ahead, Kate. You have a question.
Yeah, I do. I'm just wondering where the Puritans fit in all this, because they're anti-Episcopal Church.
Yes,
right. Okay.
They are. Yep. And so the Puritans were not they were part of the resistance to this. So they were what's it called? The part of not the loyalists, but the
wanted to purify the Anglican Church.
Patriot. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
They were, and they ended up up in Massachusetts and all
Right,
this kind of
and
stuff
not
as
in
well.
Virginia.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, Maryland was Anglican and you'll hear a little bit more about this, but there were a lot of colonies that had the Anglican Church had their grip on it. And there were other places that were Congregationalists and Mennonites and all this kind of stuff, So I think the three main denominations at the time, if I'm not wrong, were the Anglican Church, the Congregational Church, and the Presbyterians, if I'm not wrong. It was those were the big three. And also somewhere in here was Methodism. And we're not even talking about the Great Awakening that happened. There was so much rich stuff that took place before the Declaration of Independence. So listen to this juicy piece of history. So you had the clergy who were trying to convince everybody to not go against England. And so I'm going to read this to you from Bob Pritchard. Pritchard is a seminary professor at Virginia Theological Seminary. He came up with this great book. If you want to really get into the details, it's called It's called A History of the Episcopal Church. And it's the third edition is out. And Denise Galbo, are you in here? That's the one I told you I forgot to mention. A lot of books that we're going to be talking about during the series are in our library and they're displayed out here. Thank you to Denise and our librarians. So listen to this. With the onset of the revolution, the colonial legislatures moved quickly to ensure the support of colonial religious groups. Southern legislatures acceded to a longstanding request by Baptists and Presbyterians that the salaries of the clergy of the Church of England be suspended. Maryland followed in 1777 and 1778. So the abolition of salaries, so you're no longer paid by taxes, right? Not only placated dissenters, it also guaranteed that the clergy of the Church of England would be financially dependent on the voluntary offerings of their congregations, a move that made it difficult for loyalist clergy to openly disagree with patriots. So you want money? Yeah, that's a really powerful way. So, and since then, clergy have not been paid by taxes in America. So, okay. Most clergy are loyal to the English throne. A ton of them leave or are persecuted. A ton of them went into Canada. Go ahead.
I just want to say, is that when the Episcopal Church became the Episcopal Church in 1776?
No, not yet.
No, okay.
Not yet. You're getting close. So in 1884, so there's no clergy. There's such a shortage of clergy that the Methodists, who were also part of the Church of England, they decided, are you Methodist originally, Wesley? You are. So this might sound familiar, but Wesley, for those of you who don't know, is our seminarian intern who's joining us. He introduced himself at 9 a.m. and then again at 11:15 today. Welcome, Wesley. Glad that you're here. We're glad you're coming toward the light. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So John Wesley, we know, was an Anglican. Charles Wesley was an Anglican. John and Charles, they never started a separate Methodist church. It was called the Methodist Episcopal Church, right? Because they were called Methodists because of their systematic way of doing theology and reaching this kind of idea of purity. So the Methodist Church and the Episcopal Church and Anglican Church were in this. The Methodist Anglicans and the Anglicans were in this place where they were like, we're about to run out of clergy. People weren't taking communion. There were like such few clergy that people wouldn't see a priest for months and months. So the Methodists said, we don't need apostolic succession to do this. Now, what is apostolic succession? It means that if you go all the way back to Peter, who was the first bishop in Rome, that the hands that Peter, when he ordained and consecrated bishops, that every bishop in the Catholic tradition and the Episcopal Church and in some other traditions can trace their consecration and the hands laid on them all the way back to Peter, apostolic succession. It's a really important thing in our tradition. So the problem is that you couldn't be ordained and you couldn't be consecrated. To be consecrated, you need 3 bishops to consecrate a bishop. To be ordained, you just need 1 bishop to ordain. So there was such a shortage of priests that the Methodist branch of the Anglican Church said, this is ridiculous. God is the one who ordains. And so we're just going to ordain our own priests. And so they did that. The Anglican Church struggled a little bit longer with this. And this guy, a priest named Samuel Seabury of Connecticut, he goes to England to seek to be ordained. And even though at this point, the England had basically acknowledged the establishment of the United States. By law, you couldn't consecrate someone without them being loyal. And so legally, he couldn't be consecrated. So there were these other bishops up because of the theological distance between England and others who wanted to be more Protestant. there were these bishops up in Scotland who they got a name. They're called the non-juring bishops, right? Non-juring bishops. And they're the ones who would not swear fealty, right? They said, we don't need to be loyal to the crown to do this. And there's a long history with that. But they said, why don't you come on over, Samuel Seabury, and we'll consecrate you. So Seabury went up to Scotland. He was consecrated, and he was the first bishop to come to the United States. Then in 1885, you have the first General Convention of the Episcopal Church, and it's there that they adopt the name Episcopal. Go ahead. Oops. Yeah, you're right. That's wrong. Thank you for catching that. So thank you for catching that. 17. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, David. I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat the question. Why stick with the Nicene? That's great. So we do observe apostolic succession. That's why I'm saying because Seabury went up to, he was consecrated in that apostolic line. It's just that the bishops in Scotland, they were in that line. They just had a disagreement with England, right? So he's consecrated. He comes to the U.S. There's a couple of other bishops. Okay, so during the first General Convention, not only do we adopt the name Episcopal, which is so interesting. I didn't even know this. Did you guys know that Episcopal was a church party in England, actually years earlier? It was a church party that was advocating for the supremacy of bishops, right? You also had the Presbyterians, who were actually a party in Parliament. When they called themselves the Protestant Episcopal Church, they were basically saying we're Protestant, we're not Catholic. And episkopos is where we get the word Episcopal from. In Greek means bishop. What they were doing is they were affirming the authority of bishops. So that's where the Episcopal Church ended. And that name was actually first used by the church in Maryland, even before the first General Convention. In Maryland is where they started calling themselves Episcopalians. Also, during that first General Convention, the convention authorizes the preparation of an American prayer book. What's the important thing they're trying to take out of the prayer book? Yeah, prayers in morning prayer and evening prayer that are for the crown. So they're trying to get rid of that. Let's see. Yeah. So then there were two other bishops named William White and this other guy named Provoost, Provoost. I don't know how you pronounce that. I've never heard it before spoken today. But so these two guys, they actually went to England and they waited it out, and they actually got consecrated by English bishops, who eventually, it didn't take England long to say, we're either going to catch up here or we're going to lose the church, right? So those two were consecrated. They came back. They kind of looked down on Samuel Seabury because he was consecrated up in Scotland. The very first bishop who was consecrated on U.S. soil, who was who? Who can tell me? It's a name very familiar to most of you. Claggett, right? Of Maryland. So Claggett is consecrated. Let's see. John Claggett, he's consecrated in, I can't remember what year, 1780. And he is that right? No. He's consecrated after all this stuff. And the thing is that the two bishops, William White and Provoost, and then the other bishop who was kind of looked down on as not being totally legitimate, Seabury, they needed like one more bishop just to make sure that it was like, to allay the concerns of the others. So there was one other bishop that they had from Virginia, who they figured out some way to do this. I didn't spend too much time looking into it, but John Claggett was the first guy to be ordained, consecrated in America. And then that's the history of how we became Episcopalians. how we became distinct from the Church of England. And next week, we'll talk more about our polity, because that was a huge distinctive characteristic from England. So a lot changed. Yes. So before you ask any questions, let me just say this, stay right there. The rest of this time, I want to hear your engagement with this history. What is interesting to you? What is kind of a turnoff to you about this? And some of the questions we can answer, and someone to say, like, here's the next session where we're going to talk about it. Go ahead, Tom.
So this is really great. I think people would be interested to know that in 1785, the people that wrote the Constitution of the Episcopal Church, many of them were also representatives of the colonies to the U.S. Constitutional Convention, which was happening up the road. They did it at the same time. And so the Constitution of the Episcopal Church, Protestant Episcopal Church of America, was created at the same time as the U.S. Constitution was drafted by many of the same people. And you can see it in the Book of Common Prayer. That Constitution's there in the book.
And I believe that 2/3 of those who signed the Constitution, or the, what's it called? The Declaration of Independence, 2/3 were actually Anglicans. So they really loved the church. They just had problems with parts of it. So, okay, I got people online and people in here. So let's have a conversation. What else do you know about our origin story that I didn't mention, or how else do you want to interact with this? So this is us telling our story today. Would you come up, Dylan? Thank you.
So this is kind of like an oxymoron of the Episcopal Church. King Henry VIII starts the whole thing because he wants to get a divorce. And most historians say that this is the worst thing that ever happened to women, because when marriage was for life in a world where women had few opportunities to make money, have jobs, or support themselves, being divorced like he did to Catherine of Aragon puts her in poverty, and all women who were ever divorced since. At the same time, the Episcopal Church today ordains more women, I believe, than, or at least hires more women. I think the Baptists may ordain more women, but hires more women as Episcopal priests. And I would just love to look at this history through the lens of feminism.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. I will tell you, and I hate that you guys have to wait so long for this. And just so you know, I don't have all this information living in my head, right? So I studied for today's session, and I will tell you that the session where we're going to cover that stuff is called Defining Moments. And it's going to be either in like March or April or something like that. We have a lot of wonderful forums that are scheduled this year. So these are interspersed. This is not, all like a series that's consecutive. But in those defining moments, we're going to talk about the Episcopal Church and African Americans in America, and women in America, and LGBTQIA, all that kind of stuff that shaped us into who we are today. But we weren't like that. So we did not ordain the first women. Actually, the very first women to be ordained in the Episcopal Church were called the Philadelphia 11, and they were ordained as an act of protest. So it was not blessed by the whole church, and the church caught up really, really fast after that. In 78 or something like that, 77. What does anyone remember? Something around there. I will tell you that Bob Pritchard, who I read an excerpt from, this professor at VTS, is he still there? No, he's not. He retired. He is part of a cohort that year he's a guy, obviously, and they said, we will not be ordained as men until women are ordained. So there was this whole boycott of ordination, so. Yep, about the Philadelphia 11. Yeah. So what else? Go ahead. Can you come up? I know I hate to make you do that, but sorry. No, we got to watch you wobble all the way over there, Nancy. It's just so the people at home can hear us. Okay.
So I understand the history part of this, but as somebody who grew up both in the Methodist Church and the Presbyterian Church, I've never really understood bishops and why bishops, as opposed to if you're going to try to rule yourselves as these people ultimately in the US decided they wanted to do in their faith, why bishops?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, next week we'll talk about polity, but I will tell you that bishops are in the Bible. In fact, what we talked about today in the sermon is that James, the letter of James, the brother of Jesus, he was the first bishop in Jerusalem. And he is, the letter of James itself is a letter from the bishop to the community in Jerusalem, setting them, helping to guide them in a time of real turmoil and polarization. Again, preview to today's sermon. So it is priests, deacons, bishops. It's all actually in scripture. So it is a biblical model. It doesn't mean that other churches are not following a biblical model, but for us, that structure is super important. Now, the thing that's super different is that in the Catholic Church, you have like what the Pope says, everybody has to do, right? And then bishops have this kind of judicial authority over their clergy. That does not exist in the Episcopal Church. So one of the things that's so amazing about the Episcopal Church, and we're going to talk more about this, is something called bonds of affection. Like we are in relationship with one another as Anglicans in the world because we want to be. There's no creed that says if you believe this and this, that makes you an Episcopalian. We've got a book of common prayer. Again, this is what stood the test of time, is that those who pray together stay together. So after the Civil War, for example, every denomination had the part of it that was in the north and the part of it that was in the south, right? And so after the Civil War, most denominations had a hard time bridging the gap. Those in the south stayed southern and those in the north stayed in the north. The Episcopal Church was one of the only ones that actually had an easy time coming back together because they were using the same book of common prayer, right? So it's really beautiful. You can go anywhere in the world and you can walk into a service that has like a different languages that you don't understand and you can follow the service. And so this is what I mean is like with the bishops, they are, obviously the diocese does have authority over us, but there's no other bishop that's over Mary Ann in that way. So I hate to say that the presiding bishop, his thoughts are only suggestions. We choose to listen to one another. We choose to be in relationship with one another. The Archbishop of Canterbury he is considered the first among equals, right? He is not over us like the Pope is. So that's a really important distinction. So what else? I'm interested in those of you who come from a Catholic background. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you're comfortable talking about what feels different about this place for you, go ahead, come on up.
So I came to St. John's after going through Catholic school my entire education, like grade school, high school, and even a Jesuit college. But that was just to go to New York, really. But
immersed.
But immersed for sure. And one thing, 2 years ago, we went to Ireland, which is where we're from, both sides of the family with the kids. And what was interesting is, especially when you go to Ireland, you visit a lot of churches, and what you could really see over and over again, which we see when we hear, is that a lot of obviously the doctrine is the same, but the churches all look very different. The Church of England or the Church of Ireland churches were like St. John's to my eyes, more stripped down, more bare, whereas the Catholic churches had, the statues of saints. Yes. And were just much more steeped in sort of what I say, and I say this with respect, like sort of the mythology part of it. And I say mythology in like the most respectful way. Yeah. So that is definitely something that, and that there was, my aunts and my grandmother had much more, there was more, prayers to particular saints, saying the rosary every day. And that's sort of the mystery. That's maybe a better way of saying it. Yeah. Whereas the Episcopal Church to us has always felt a little more practical, if you will.
Yeah. So thank you. These questions are awesome because they they help get us on important topics like you can go to an Episcopal church that looks more Catholic than the church you came from, with icons and all this kind of stuff. So Episcopal churches, there was an Oxford movement that happened in late 1800s that really tried to bring the Catholic roots back to the Episcopal Church. And that's where you started having these things called low church and high church. And we are a pretty low church. A really low church doesn't even wear vestments like Anne is being vested right now, right? So a high church can look so Anglo-Catholic, no women up front, all men, and they do like bells and whistles and they cross themselves a million times and all this kind of stuff. And yet they're still a part of the Episcopal Church, right? So this is what I mean is that it spans. So don't think that by coming to St. John's, you're experiencing all of the breadth and the depth of the Episcopal Church. It's so wide. And I can tell you which churches, if you want to visit a church that's very different from us, that's Anglo-Catholic, where you need to go. Like one of them, unless something's changed in the last 5 years, Ascension and St. Agnes in DC is very high church in that way. What else I want to say about that? Go ahead, Carl.
So I came from a Catholic background and had been unchurched for many years. But when it was time to baptize our first child, figured you had to give them something to rebel against. Otherwise, what do they do? You know. So anyway, I walked into St. John's.
Wait, so you took them to the Episcopal Church so they would rebel against the Episcopal Church, as opposed to taking them to a Catholic church and letting them rebel against that?
Against
Yeah, you're like,
against the religion.
let's really make sure they're Catholic. Yeah. Anyway, so
I mean, it worked for me, the rebellion. So
Yeah,
why
that's good.
not?
Yeah.
But it might. Yeah. Anyway, so I walked just up the street to St. John's, and I walked in, and the first thing I noticed was the bareness, the sparseness of the church, and the wonderful light. But the biggest difference that has stuck with me is the style of preaching. And I try to figure out what it is. And of course, my experience with the Catholic Church is now quite old. But preaching in the Catholic Church to me always meant that the voice of authority was in the pulpit, and that truth was being handed down to you. And for me, it was a very refreshing change to find that within at least St. John's, the preaching has been on a far more equal level. It is a preacher can get up and talk about experiences from their daily life, which relate exactly to the experiences of the daily life of the parishioners, those listening. And that, to me, has been an enormous difference. It's this difference between authority and speaking really as an equal who is reminding people of things.
yes.
So,
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. I can't add to that. I love that, Carl. Thank you. Yeah, Mary and Jane, sorry, right behind. Yep.
Oh,
Go ahead.
To add to that, I guess I've always appreciated, having been raised Catholic, the political issues that you talked about, the authority and the acceptance that people are in charge of things. But I think the most important thing to me is the inclusivity, which we've kind of touched on, and the idea that there is a lot of diversity, as you say, within the Episcopal Church. But for me, it was a fundamental that women and gays and everybody is always welcome. And I was raised in a church, and my brother is here, where that just was not possible. It's pretty much the most important thing to me, in addition to all the other things that we're saying, that welcome to everybody, that we're all children of God. And
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. I wish we could say that it's always been like that. It hasn't. And so even like women being ordained came so long after women voting in America. You know what I mean? Like it took so long to get there. and we're not even close, right? We're still moving, but thank you. Yeah, it's good. This part of the theological lens that we're going to talk about later, how we get to these places. Go ahead, Jane. Two more questions, Jane, and then Dan.
Yeah. So I haven't been Catholic, but I'm married to a Catholic, and you know, a lot of my best friends are Catholic, and so I explored Catholicism when I first got married, and growing up as a Protestant, what hit me sort of, I don't want to say wrong, but what didn't resonate with me was the top-down feeling that it gave me, like, this is the truth. And I'm going to tell you what's true, you know, coming from the pulpit. And I think what I've experienced in Protestant churches is the freedom to come to my own understanding about God and about spirituality, and an acceptance of people wherever they are in their spiritual journey, even if people are exploring and don't know if they believe in God. My feeling is they're welcome in Protestant churches and in the Episcopal Church. And I don't know if that's how priests or bishops would think about it. Like, is the truth defined, you know, in our documents, or can we let our parishioners explore truth? But that's the feeling I get from the church.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is true. I will tell you that one of the things that Episcopal Church does exceptionally well is be comfortable with ambiguity. We're comfortable with ambiguity, and there's mystery. Like, we tend to believe that the things that you know about God, you know, and you should do. There's a lot we don't know, and it's okay to explore those things together. But there is room. Again, I can't wait to get to the theology and beliefs part of our. Before Dan speaks, I just wanted to point out, Lindsay online says, I have a good friend who is a strong Catholic. She always says to help explain to me that Catholicism is not a democracy. The Episcopal Church does feel actually different, because our polity, like as Tom says, mirrors the our government's polity. So we have two houses, and House of Bishops and House of Deputies and all this kind of stuff. So Dan, last question.
Hi,
Thank you.
hi everyone. I'm Dan. So I am Roman Catholic. I owe much of my life and career decisions and service and so many things in my marriage and family
Yes.
to being a Catholic.
Amen.
So I've been part of this church for a year now. And for us, and I guess for me specifically, this came down to a very real experience within the Catholic Church. Because first, my daughters who are here started asking us questions about whether they could be priests. And of course, the answer was no in the Catholic Church. And that bothered, I think, me and my wife a lot, because it meant that somehow their spiritual commitment was truncated at the starting gate. And that lack of inclusion started to percolate in us. But then the other thing that was very real for us is that two of us, my daughter and I, have celiac disease, so we cannot eat wheat. And so everything in our diet for medical reasons has to be gluten-free. Well, it turned out that when we started to talk to the priests about this, they said that as part of transubstantiation, which really goes back to the history you were describing, the difference of the beliefs in the Eucharist, the Catholic Church believes that wheat has to be in the wafer because it goes back to the history of what Jesus did in the Last Supper. So my daughter and I really sat every single Sunday not receiving communion. And then we tried to make all sorts of workarounds with the Catholic priests every single Sunday to hand her a gluten-free wafer, or what they called a low-gluten wafer, because that was the only way they could get around the rules. It became so distracting for us that it came down to a moment last October where one of the priests there just wouldn't give my daughter the wafer because he didn't believe that the gluten-free wafer had any form of Jesus in it. And so when we went to the priest to discuss this, that was the moment where for us, it would become very real, because you talk about a history that's very conceptual. It has kings and queens and history and all that. And it came down to a decision. What do I really feel is in that Eucharist? And should I be part of it, or should I just find some sort of workaround? And we couldn't find the workaround. And I think my heart's a bit broken about this, because I miss the Catholic Church. I will say I love the Catholic Church, but I feel that I couldn't stay there lying to myself saying, well, we're going to find some workaround, or maybe in 50 years, my daughter could become a priest if she wanted to. That ended up becoming the moment where I started to search, and we found you. But for us, it was a very real interaction of what does the faith say, what's in the books, what's in the history, and then what's actually right here in our hands when we come to the Mass.
Dan,
So
thank you so much. Can we just hold that space together? I find that so powerful. Like, I love the Catholic Church, but the Catholic Church is it's not meeting where we are. It's like not touching ground right now for us and our family. And I love that you're not like, forget the Catholic Church, I'm moving on. This is a very painful place. And I think this is one of the things that I take pride in the Episcopal Church. I had a professor years ago who said, you got to remember that the Catholicism held the faith, kept the faith for 1,500 years. Like we need the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is the reason the church exists in the world today. So we have to respect the Catholic Church. One thing that I love about the Episcopal Church is our motto. The Episcopal Church welcomes you. And so if it's for like a short period of time, or if it's forever.
I'll say one more thing.
yeah.
So when I came and I was interviewing lots of different churches, and I came to see Sari and Ann, and the first thing they said, wait a minute, you haven't received in how many years? I said, I don't know, 6, 7 years. I've been sitting in pews every Sunday, not receiving. That minute, they went and got the Eucharist and came out and gave me Eucharist. It was the first time in 6 years. So I'm thankful to you for that. And I think that's part of the experience of saying, what does it mean to come back to God, and where are we invited most to be close to God?
Thank you, Dan.
So thank you for everything.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Go ahead, Ann.
Link to Philadelphia 11 documentary.
Okay, all right. Thank you, everyone. See you next week.